Let me dish it to you, Ethan, because I actually already did a whole video breakdown on this like a month ago or something on Alexandre Sarr, who on a
Mm,
lot of people is the number one prospect, or on a lot of big boards. I mean, for a lot of people, a lot of reporters, draft scouts, etc., is the number one prospect in this draft. Regardless of
mm,
that conversation, give me your thoughts, Ethan, because I believe you got to dive into him a little bit more this time, um,
I
on
did.
Alexandre Sarr.
Obviously, immediately, I see why he is slated as the number one guy on everyone's draft board, pretty much. Um, I think Sarr and Wemby have the potential to be what Hakeem and Ralph Sampson would have been had injuries not gotten in the way. Now, in that scenario, that makes Wemby Ralph Sampson and Sarr Hakeem Olajuwon. Now, if you watch his highlights, you're like, this guy's not Hakeem at all because Hakeem has the crazy highlights of footwork and pumping pump fakes and getting guys off the ground. Um, Go back and watch it a little bit closer and go back and watch Hakeem's tape from college. Hakeem was not known for offense really until a couple years into the league. He was really a defensive anchor that could dunk, and he developed over time. But I think they have a lot of similarities as far as fluidity and natural feel for the game. Sarr eats up space very well. He's very versatile. He's comfortable in the low block. He's got simple footwork right now, but like I said, very, very fluid. He has a couple go-to moves. He's got a smooth hook shot as well, and a really, really nice fadeaway out of the block as well, kind of in that high pinch post area. Um, a little bit reminiscent in the pick and roll and pick and pop game of, and I texted you this, and this is going to sound crazy for a lot of you in the comments, but a little similar to old Spur LaMarcus Aldridge. Now, I know they're very different players. LaMarcus is not nearly as athletic. He doesn't run the floor nearly as well, not as great of a defender. But as far as being in the right place at the right time, knowing how to work off of a screen and staying in connection with the ball handler, getting the ball in spaces that he wants, and just being patient. He has all of those qualities already. I understand he's very raw. His numbers aren't exactly jumping off the page when you're just looking at the box score. I think he averaged 18 minutes a game, got like close to 8 points, 5 rebounds, maybe a block or two a game. But you can't really base anything on stats with this guy because of his age, because he's so raw, and his development was so quick, which is why I think a lot of people think back to Wemby when they watch Sarr. Obviously, they're French as well, but because he's 7'1", extremely athletic, and moves kind of like a guard with ball handling skills, he's got the shooting touch. Obviously, his 3-point efficiency will get better, but his shot looks fine to me.
Thank you.
Um,
Yeah.
and like he's got a nice high release, kind of like LaMarcus Aldridge as well. So no one's ever gonna block that thing. And then defensively, I mean, that's what everyone has been talking about pretty much. Like he's got the help defense as well as just the post lockdown, and his athleticism. Again, his ability to move laterally. That's what kind of screams mixtures of Wemby and Hakeem to me. Like Hakeem had that lateral quickness down pat. I mean, everyone's seen the Kevin Garnett video where he's like, "I'm hitting him with the lateral movement." That's what Hakeem used to say all the time as trash talk. He can't keep up with me. I got the lateral movement. This kid has that ability as well. So if there's a potential that we can pair he and Victor alongside each other, Jude, I think I would pull the trigger. Now, I don't think we'll get into a second. Klingon will start next to Wemby if we were to draft him. I do think Sarr has to start next to Wemby because he fixes all the issues that we have with Zach Collins. Sure, shooting at first might be a problem, but like I said, I don't think that's going to be a long-term issue.
Yeah, I mean, and apologies, excuse me, for any of you guys who have already watched the one little film review that I did on Alexandre Sarr, like I said, like a month ago or so. But what I did for this, because I knew you would watch the video that I sent you, which was the same one that I kind of went over in that video. I went and kind of focused on the G League Ignite games that he had. He had two of those this year, and we've talked about G League Ignite.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, had a very rough season, but at the same time, in an NBA rules setting or G League rules, but y'all get what I mean.
Mm.
And also against some of the other top prospects this season. I mean, there's one play where he's kind of trailing in transition, where Ron Holland had kind of picked up the pace and gone towards the basket, and he tries to throw up a little like floater on the side of the baseline, and
Mm.
Sarr comes out of nowhere and just swats him. He clamped up Matas Buzelis a couple times in the highlights that I watched, where Buzelis comes on a backdoor, and this was in the half court, but still, Sarr was more on the elbow or more towards the perimeter. But he reacts, realizes he's there, chases him down, swats it against the backboard. Buzelis gets his own rebound, tries to go back up with it against Sarr. Sarr swats it again.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two guys that are going to get picked in the lottery. And, that's without mentioning guys like Tyler Smith and Izan Almansa that he played against not only in both of those games against the Ignite, but that he also played against during his time in Overtime Elite, Ethan,
Mm-hmm.
which, is another thing that probably a lot of people don't know about Alexandre Sarr, but he was in Overtime Elite. He was actually brought in the same class with Dominic Barlow. Dominic Barlow's a little bit older than him, but they were a part of that first core group to get brought into Overtime Elite, as young players and get paid. But there were some highlights that I found of a 20-10 game from him there where he's playing against Rob Dillingham, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just kind of interesting to kind of watch that and, scout them in that setting. Obviously, they're different players now with him playing in the Australian League for the Perth Wildcats this past season and Rob Dillingham playing SEC ball. But at the same time, the thing that I noticed from a lot of this, Ethan, and I also went and watched his FIBA U19 tape from this past season as well, where he was playing with old boy Zachary
Mm-hmm.
Risachet. So there were, a lot of different prospects that he played with. But the thing I noticed was, the FIBA style of play is different. But from OTE, Overtime Elite, the G League, and the NBL, a lot of the stuff that he's doing, the numbers might not exactly be the same, but the traits, the skills, they're translating at all three of those levels. Like I'm seeing, and these are times, when he's younger, you know what I mean? And now he's obviously much more developed than he was 2 years ago, playing for Overtime Elite. But there are some skills and traits whenever it comes to his defensive movement, as you mentioned, his fluidity. Also, even like showing some post bags and getting dunks. I saw all of that. Like I didn't see as much of his perimeter game in
Mm-hmm.
Overtime Elite, for example. I saw that much more. Now we're seeing that in the NBL and his G League Ignite games. And I saw some skills in the FIBA tape as well, but because of the way that FIBA is played, he kind of has to play a little bit more physical in that game, or in that style of play, which I really liked, honestly. Like to see him like post a Spain defender up and get good post position, get the ball, and then use a post turnaround to get a dunk.
Mm-hmm.
Like, some of the appeal that we see from him, or a lot of the appeal that we see from him is his fluidity and his offensive and defensive movement, whether that's the LaMarcus Aldridge, kind of comp in the pick and pop that you talked about, or just the way that he runs the floor or can even take the ball up the court at times.
Mm-hmm.
But to see, kind of those more physical skill sets, if you will, in a more defensive game in FIBA, I like to see that as well. I know that was kind of all over the place there, but just to kind of summarize it a little bit, I liked the translation that I saw from Overtime Elite to G League Ignite and the NBL, how there were
Mm-hmm.
skills and traits that I could see at all three of those levels, but then also him adjusting to a different style of play in the FIBA game. That was also something that I liked also. He's going to have some adjustments to the NBA, just like we saw with Victor this year. Um, but the defensive potential of those guys, Ethan, and the flashes that Sar shows offensively, like even if you want to say, oh, the shooting percentage isn't that great. One, I would tell you to go look at the shot, and that's why I said thank you whenever you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned how the way that his shot looks, and also look at Wemby's percentage last year. Is Wemby a
Right.
bad shooter? You know what I mean? I could go down the list with even other players whenever it comes to the efficiency conversation. Just the context is key, but the way that he can put the ball on the floor and kind of move like a guard off the ball if you need him to, you know. Um, those are the reasons why I think this is an appealing marriage, if you will, and why I think that, I understand. Even we talked about this a little bit earlier in the year, like maybe it would get too jumbled. and we'd see a lot of the stuff like kind of with the whole Zach conversation that we opened this thing up, that kind of gives us a little bit of pushback, and maybe this won't work out the way it does, the way that we want it to. But with the way that Sarr moves, and also with his frame, like as much as he's a 7-footer, he's 7 foot 205 or 215, somewhere in that range. He's
Shredded.
not right. He's not like a giant guy though.
Mhm.
That really ties into the Bam Adebayo, Jaren Jackson Jr. comparison that we've made at times whenever it comes to just like those type of defenders, bigs, that can
Mhm.
play on the perimeter and play on the inside. And, those guys are both bigger than Alexandre Sarr, and, putting on weight might be something that he wants to do. But also, if you combine the length of him and Victor, I think that mitigates a lot of the size aspect. I mean, we saw that this season. As much as I brought up the Joel thing, and I'll be done after this, Ethan, like we saw so many times where Victor maybe got beat in the physical aspect, but because his arms are so long, he's still going to block people.
Mhm.
I think that ties into their pairing. But why do you think that them being paired together would work offensively and defensively?
Offensively, I don't think they would get nearly in the way of each other as Zach and Wemby did. Zach can't put the ball on the floor. I think Sarr has the ability to. Sarr moves well off the ball, like you were just talking about. I think there probably are moments where they can probably run screen action for him to get the ball. There's probably moments where he and Wemby can run pick and roll together. Zach and Wemby never did that. So I think there's action within the offense that would make that a more fluid adjustment for both players. They both also can come from overseas, so I'm sure there's like some FIBA connection there where they have more chemistry than Zach and Wemby would ever have. Um, Defensively, I don't think there's any issue. I think that like they both can defend the perimeter. They're both locked down low. Sarr is probably more physically capable of stopping, like a Jonas Valanciunas just because of his size, a Joel Embiid, and Nikola Jokic, just kind of like big, girthy, physical centers. So that eliminates that aspect of Victor's deficiencies. But then whoever's the help defender is going to get a block every single time. You know what I mean? Because like
Yeah.
if they beat Wemby, who's coming over from the weak side? Alexandre Sarr. Same thing from the other side. Wemby's coming over to help. Like they're not going to be able to get a single shot off in the paint if they're both playing together.
Yeah, and what you just said at the end there is kind of what I was hinting at the end there, that the length kind of does mitigate the size
Right.
issue, in a lot of ways. And the other thing we've got to remember is Wemby's going to have another year of getting stronger and putting on weight. That was something he talked about in the TNT interview last night.
Mhm.
Um, and then also, I mean, I know that it's still going to be rookie version of Alexandre Sarr, but over time he's going to do the same thing. And also, he's going to have the summer league. He's going to have an off season, of strength and conditioning going in. There's still definitely going to be that adjustment. We saw that this year with Victor. But this whole conversation is kind of a long term thing. Like, I know that obviously Victor has talked about, accelerating the timeline and stuff like that. And we've talked about that for sure. But if they're pairing these two, like, this is the thing, like, okay, in 2 to 3 years, how are they going to look? Not how is rookie Alexandre Sarr going to look next to Victor. Like, I think the deficiencies that people may be concerned about, like, yeah, they might happen next season, but are they going to happen long term? That's kind of what I was getting at there.
Right. And it's a little off topic to what you just said, but I think it's a great point. Gregory in the comments, Utah went that route with Kessler, Hendricks, and Laurie, and that's the Timberwolves model with Cat, Rudy, and Jaden McDaniels. So I think that's kind of going back to what we said was Sohan. Yeah, Sohan, Sarr, and Wemby together. Like maybe right now it wouldn't work super well because Sarr's shooting just under 30%. I think Sohan's shooting probably low to mid 30s at this point, and then
Right.
Victor's Victor. But down the road, once they all have time to gel and work on their shots, that would be a terrifying defensive lineup if they can learn how to shoot together.
And I'm glad that Illuminati brought that comment up. For those of you guys who are listening on podcast, we brought up having Sohan, Sarr, and Wemby together would be a defensive nightmare for teams from Illuminati Gaming and Sports. Um, how many times this year did we see Jeremy Sohan pick up the primary ball handler?
Yeah.
And I had that thought when I was thinking about Sarr. you can put Sohan on the primary ball handler, and then you have those two guys in the paint.
Not to mention Devin, who always gets lost in this defensive
Thank
discussion.
you.
He's pretty locked down too for a shooting guard. Let's
His steals this season, that was something that I really noticed, and his on-ball defense as well is something that
Mhm,
improved, and he's got all the physical tools to
mhm,
where, like, I'm not really, even if, yeah, there's some plays where he gets beat, I'm just like, it's 23-year-old Devin Vassell, like, he's gonna be
mm.
fine. Like,
Right, right, right.